the PCAM Podcast, recorded at Wave Studios, a sound design and mixing facility with a worldwide reputation for audio excellence. The PCAM Podcast. Hi there, welcome to another PCAM Podcast. My name's Blair. I'm joined by usual with Tony, Augusta, Chris and Sally. Feel free to find out more about us and PCAM on the PCAM website. Now, today we're going to be talking about royalties and publishing, which I must confess when I first entered this industry is something that I knew very little about, and I found really sort of mind-boggling, to be honest, because it can get quite complex. Now, who would like to lead the conversation on what exactly a royalty is and how that's generated? Do you want to start off, Chris?
Yeah, a royalty is very simple. In terms of what we do, I mean, there are two types of royalty, mechanical royalty and performing royalty. I think we can leave mechanical royalty because mechanical royalty is something that applies when you mechanically copy something, so produce a CD or whatever. But for the sake of what we're talking about, it's really the performing royalty that we're talking about. So very simply, the copyright owner of a work is entitled to a performing royalty, theoretically, every time the work is broadcast, performed effectively. That on the radio or the television or whatever. But there are obviously, the devil is in the detail here. The truth of the matter is that in today's diverse media environment, some outlets will pay you theoretically for every performance. So if you're on terrestrial television, for example, they report to the Performing Rights Society a comprehensive 100% playlist of everything that's performed, and as long as you're a member, you should be a member of the PRS if you're a composer.
Very important.
Very important. And you register your works, equally important,
which you can do
online.
Yep.
It may look a little daunting to begin with, but actually, if you work your way through it, it's not rocket science at the end of it. So if your works are registered and you are a member, you will get a royalty for, let's say, domestic terrestrial broadcasts in the UK. You will get a royalty on some of the broadcasts that you may have on a satellite or cable outlet. The reason that you don't get it on every one is that a lot of stations are sampled rather than giving a complete list of everything. So what happens is that Sky Sports, for example, might be sampled 6 days a month. And if you hit that sample, you'll be paid. And what happens is that you get a multiplier. So for mathematical simplicity, if it's 6 days a month and you hit the sample, there will be a multiplier of 5, so as if it were the entire month. Obviously, the smaller channels will be sampled less because they sample them less because their license is related to their revenue. So if you're on a very esoteric channel, which has a very small advertising revenue, their license will be very small, and therefore their sample will be smaller, and the rate that you get will be lower. PRS does publish a fairly comprehensive list of the rate card for what the value of a performing royalty is on each channel that you're going to be played.
Actually. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
The problems begin more, as it were, when you start to go abroad. Because things change. Unlike, if you're Robbie Williams with a song, if it's Angels, it remains Robbie Williams, Angels, wherever in the world it's performed. Unfortunately, if it's a deodorant, the name may change, the product name may change, the title of the film may change, and all of the things that follow it, like, for example, the clock number, which maybe Tony will talk about in a minute. But I mean, in the UK, we have a thing called the clock number, which is when a film is clocked, you actually see the clock ticking up to 0 when it begins, and if you look on that pre-roll, as it were, you'll see a number, and that is the clock number, and it's a unique identifier. Unfortunately, those things don't necessarily travel with the film. So a lot of the things which would travel in the UK don't travel abroad. So in terms of publishing, it might be advisable if you're doing a lot of work which is travelling abroad, particularly to specific territories. France pays more in royalties probably than most other territories. You might want to consider having a sub-publisher that looks after your interests in that territory. You will find that many overseas collection societies will pay you as a writer and then will hold on to the publisher's share. because you don't have a local sub-publisher, and then you have to chase that later, which is a drag. There's a lot of things to be said, but I'm sure I've spoken enough in this moment.
Well, I mean, that's a fantastic introduction to what exactly a royalty is, and very concise, I would say. Tony, have you got anything to say about clock numbers and all that jazz?
Well, when you do a track for an agency, when a film is made, the script has to be passed by. It often changes them. I think it used to be the BACC. It's now Clearcast is the people who do it now, and they have to stamp the script. And this is to check the script for blasphemy, for things that might offend people. And all those sort of things, and the script will then get stamped with a number, which is the clock number, and that will then go onto the film. So that holds it all together, and with that information is meant to go the composer, the producer, the copyright owner, and so on. And that information is then given to people like the PRS and to television stations, so broadcast details can then all be tied up. It's not an infallible system. And we're working towards trying to watermark music, which will make everything a lot more easy, but not easier to track. And there are already several companies like TuneSat and various other ones who, there's lots of them that for a fee you can send your music to, and they will try and track the broadcasts. And it's becoming more and more of a sort of a sensible thing, but the trouble with all this is that there's no one system. So as a result, at the moment it's all very fragmented, and what everyone could do with really is one system that everyone uses.
Well, having said that, there's a big initiative going on at the moment called the Global Repertoire Database, which is an attempt to actually, it's for pop music as well as for other things, but it's an attempt to sort of unify the data so that data can't be randomly altered at various points around the globe, that basically what goes stays. And it's an enormous initiative. I mean, in terms of, the collection societies are aware of the fact that we're in an environment now where they're fielding millions and millions of payments from outlets that never existed years ago, and that they're tiny payments, so it's micro payments. And what they've realised is that the old system by which they collected it was not fit for purpose, because obviously it was very mechanical, very manual, and if you're getting a fraction of a penny for a play, you can't afford to have somebody physically flicking through pieces of paper to try and figure out who wrote it. So they have been compelled to respond to this environment by creating or attempting to create systems that aren't sort of manually laborious and therefore make it economically worthwhile to deal with micropayments. So this is the way forward, and clearly, it's a constant state of flux and development, but it's the way it's going.
I mean, the important thing is, as far as a composer is concerned, is to make sure that A, their stuff is registered with the MCPS and PRS, and B, that you give the agency has all the proper details, because quite often people don't bother to let the agency know, and therefore on the consignment notes, sort of wrong things are written down. So if you do your bit, and even if you have a publisher, it's worthwhile you keeping an eye on your stuff, because particularly if it's a big publisher, you can get lost amongst them. I would recommend anyone sort of starting off to do their own registrations or their own chasing in the UK, because frankly, you have much more concern about your stuff than anyone else, and you also know where your stuff's being played out, which a lot of people don't. Overseas, as Chris says, it's a different thing, because obviously you can't monitor it so easily, but as you know, that if somebody pays you to license your track overseas, it is being played in that territory, and therefore you should be due some money from that territory. Not all territories overseas pay royalties on commercials, but the majority do, and again, you can get lists of that from the PRS.
Yeah.
One of the things I was going to say actually was about licensing to overseas territories, because often when you do a track, they will know in advance that they want it for a certain number of overseas territories. Sometimes, I had a client for a long time who wanted a license for all moving media worldwide for 1 year, which is great, except you don't know where that's going to go, and then it becomes tricky to find out where it's been. But one of the things you need to do is to remember to do when you license them, because very often when you license things overseas, it will happen after you've delivered it, after it's been in the UK. It will subsequently, somebody says, we need it in Kazakhstan or Poland or God knows, and then you will issue a license, a usage license for that territory for the period required. It's important that you then actually register that again with PRS so that they understand that it's gone to that territory, and that they can chase it if royalties then fall due, when they fall due, or you can chase it. And it's complicated because obviously there's a lead time. So, for example, I think Greece, are sort of 6 years behind. So if you license something to Greece, you've got to actually put yourself a memo for 6 years down the line to make sure that you've got your royalties. And if you haven't, so that's complicated. And obviously it pays to be really on top of it, to maybe develop some little software thing that enables you to do that. But it is important that you help them to track and also get the information. I mean, it's very hard sometimes to get, where it's being played, the stations, the periods, the dates. But as much information, the more information you can get about this, the more likely you are to see a royalty return.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something actually to this, hark back to the PCAM licenses, which when you download one of them as a member from the PCAM website, it will give you scope to log all the territories that particular track is being played in, so you can keep a tab on it basically. And I think some composers who are not using those contracts and licenses will completely miss that opportunity and not necessarily even have the knowledge to make sure they know which territories that's being played in and for how long, and even the importance of asking at the time, what is this license for, how long is it going to run, where is it going to run. You need all of that information, and don't be scared to ask it.
And the clock numbers, and it also it provides the opportunity to inform the client very clearly of the composer's details, which I think Tony spoke about right at the beginning, because they need that information at their end for their consignment note, and without that, the two bits of information do not meet up in the middle, and that's when money goes astray. I think it's one of the most frustrating and mind-boggling and infuriating aspects of what we do, actually. I think the thing that amazed me when I first moved into this area of the industry is that it is so imperfect. And for something that is such an important income stream for composers to be so totally fallible. And I remember the attitude always used to be, well, if you see some PRS money, then that's a bonus, but never rely on it. And that's how it used to be, absolutely crazy. And I mean, I think things are getting better, but you really have to stay on it, because it's a very, very important income stream.
PRS have got a lot better than they were.
They have.
Their members, if you email them,
PCAM.
Yes, thanks to PCAM. If you email their members department, they're actually very good at A, replying to you almost instantly, and B, actually getting on and doing something about your query. So they used not to be, but they're now pretty helpful, actually.
Yeah.
I can tell you that, I mean, anecdotally, a few years ago, I was on a PRS panel, and somebody announced proudly that they had collected that year, in terms of royalties for commercials overseas, a total of £47,000, and I pointed out that £42,000 had gone to me from one country for one commercial. So that represented £5,000 for everything else for the rest of the world. And I was told subsequently that was a tipping point, because they went away and thought, wow, we've got to do something. Now, I can say, honestly, and I've been on the board of PRS since then, and that it's their foreign growth strategy is one of the most important things. Their overseas growth strategies is the linchpin of a lot of their things that they do, of their forecast for growth of the future. And I mean, the figures attached to overseas royalties for commercials now are a million.
Yeah, they're quite substantial.
I mean, so really, from 40, whatever it is, I mean, those numbers are slightly off the top of my head, but, from what was actually not a whole heap of corn to actually quite a substantial amount of money. So it is increasingly worth keeping track of what you're doing.
And as a composer, I mean, if you do not that many mainstream UK TV stroke internet commercials, you can expect to get an income of 20,000 plus a year out of PRS.
Yep.
So it is a very worthwhile stream of income.
Yeah, well, that was actually going to be my next question for people who are, starting out. Usually, the first thing they want to know is, how much money am I going to make?
I mean, a small commercial will make sort of. I'm talking about the composer side, not the publisher side, because if you talk about the publisher side, then you obviously just double the money up. But I mean, a small commercial, you can expect to get £1,000 in, and a well played out commercial, you could expect to get 3 to 6 to 8 to 10,000.
Yeah, and of course you're going to get your fee on top of that as well.
Yeah, this is just income just for your royalties.
Yeah.
And so, of course, if you do 5 or 6 of those a year, it's quite a substantial amount of money.
So more than worthwhile. And also, this is kind of, as a composer, you have to take responsibility for this, because advertising agencies, there's varying levels of producers who may or may not know all of this information and may or may not register things correctly.
And certainly won't care.
Yeah, and they definitely won't care as much as you do. So educate yourself. And
I agree, and hopefully that
reap
has
the
been
rewards.
Yeah, hopefully that's been very educational from our listeners. We're just going to wrap it up there, unless anyone has any final comments. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to another PCAM podcast. It's important to point out, I think, like we said earlier, that PCAM were instrumental in making sure that royalties are paid on adverts, and we worked quite closely with PRS to make sure that that happens, and that's just part of what we do at PCAM. You can find out more by going to the PCAM website or joining us on Twitter and Facebook. And finally, we're going to say our final meme. Wave to wave.
Wave to wave.
Big wave to wave. Big thanks to wave. And wave to Tom as well, who is kindly producing our podcast for us. And we will see you next time on the PCAM Podcast.
The PCAM Podcast.